Me? Because my Srimad Bhagavatam is going on. Okay, thank you.
If there's anybody online, please go ahead. I don't know if now is available, but we are.
Can you hear us, Mataji?
The word Swayam himself, also, Guru Vishnu, by elderly relatives, Vikrais, and Brahmanas, Sadarai, with their wives, Stabirai, invalid, happy, also, Ashu Vishnu, by the blessing of Yucha Maha, being praised by Anyai, by others, Bandi Vishnu, admirers, and Abhishant, and in Puram city. The translation. Then the Lord personally entered the city, accompanied by elderly relatives and empowered brahmanas with their wives, all offering benedictions and singing the glories of the Lord. Others also praised the glories of the Lord. We can repeat it, please. Then the Lord personally entered the city, accompanied by elderly relatives and invalid Brahmins with their wives, all offering benedictions and singing the glories of the Lord. Others also praised the glories of the Lord. The Brahmanas in society were never attentive to banking money for future retired life. When they were old invalids, they used to approach the assembly of the kings, and simply by praising the glorious deeds performed by the king along with their wives, they would be provided with all necessities of life. Such Brahmanas were not, so to speak, flatterers of the king, but the kings were actually glorified by their actions, and they were sincerely still more encouraged in pious acts by such Brahmanas in a dignified way. Lord Shri Krishna is worthy of all glories, and the praying Brahmanas and others were glorified themselves by chanting the glories of the Lord. We'll read the verse again. Swayam Changuruviya Viprai, Sadarai, Staviraya, Api, Ashirviya Yujamanam, Bandhu Charitat Puram. Then the Lord personally entered the city, accompanied by elderly relatives and invalid Brahmins with their wives, all offering benedictions and singing the glories of the Lord. Others also praised the glories of the Lord. Om Jnana Timiram Vishnu Jnanam Jnana Silakaya Chakshurum Militam Jnanam Tasma Shri Gurave Namah. So one of the first things I want to point out here that may go unnoticed somewhat, or maybe noticed, especially if you read the rest of the chapter and the next verse, and that is that the position of women at that time, very interesting. In the beginning, we read the first to greet him, foremost and foremost, were what in English was called prostitute. I prefer the word courtesans or another different type of words, but there were the courtesans or the public ladies. And here it says the Brahmins were accompanied by his wives. And the next verse it says the ladies of the city were greeting Krishna on the roofs. They had a completely different position, and it's pointed out in the purport that there was a performance, you could say an adherence to the concept of paradam. You know what is paradam? What does it mean, Parda. Curtain, yeah, it means curtain. So Parda is an Indian kind of, you can say, standard, where Parda literally means curtain, Pudai, if you want. It's pronounced Parda in English generally. Um, where women are sitting separate from men, even in our temple. Men and women do not mix, even for kirtan. Men and women are on a different side. So this is considered parda. So parda can be a visual curtain, a piece of cloth or a piece of bamboo, screen, whatever you have, screening. But it can also mean a certain attitude, and also means covering the head. And it means here, in the next verse, that the ladies of the city greeted or Krishna's entrance by not being visually present by the masses of people, but being absolutely secluded on the roofs of the houses. So it's very interesting that we should pay little attention to that. Three groups of women. I myself was not aware until I started studying this verse yesterday that the Brahmins were accompanied by their wives. Very interesting. And why were they accompanied by his wives? Perhaps because it said they were invalid. So when you have an invalid, you need a wife to help you, just like this now, as I walked to the temple, on the temple property, of course, but I walked into the parking lot, I saw a van, and I saw a lady opening the back to the van. I saw her pulling something out and putting something in, and it looked like wheelchairs and all kinds of stuff. So I knew, of course, this is the wife of one of my godbrothers who's coming out of the hospital today. He had a heart operation, and Red Cross has donated all this furniture, wheelchairs, etc., and movable toilets, everything to accommodate a person who's in a wheelchair. But if that person is not accompanied by his wife, what will that person do? So it was quite ironic that Krishna showed me right as I walked into the parking lot, an invalid devotee coming out of the hospital, and his wife, quite powerful, large lady, she can handle things, who is taking care of her invalid husband. Valid means you can do. Invalid means that you no longer are capable to do what generally is expected that you could do. It would be means walking or sitting or talking or whatever. So here the invalid brahmanas are being guided. Their wives are not invalid, obviously. They're guided by the capable wives to meet Sri Krishna. Very interesting. So it's interesting, the word he also said, then the Lord personally entered the city. So it gives the idea that it was believed that they were on the edges of the city, they were on the periphery, on the sima. But now they're entering into the city, so we have a slightly different view, a more intimate view, and of course, intimate view is the ladies on the roofs greeting him, and Krishna smiling at them and appreciating their presence. And even now, of course, in India, and even the house that I had, I was married in India, it had 3 stories and it has a flat roof. Now here, the roofs are all slanted. Why are the roofs slanted in the West, particularly Canada, etc.? Why are they slanted? You know what? Yeah, the flow. So the rain and the snow can be running off. Many people don't even think about it, but it's here. We have some here in a very wet area. What do you call that? This wet area? Has a special name. Anyhow, here the roofs are slanted. Also in Europe, where I came from, Holland, the roofs are all slanted. We don't have flat roofs. But when you come to India, it's completely different, and the roofs are flat because basically there's only one rainy season when it rains very much, and the rain can fall on the roof because it's all dealt with different arrangements of the water falls away. So the roofs are very important in India. What are some of the other functions? Perfect. Well, I need 2. Okay. Is that Mahaprasad? No? Oh, I thought this is on the top. No. I'm joking. So what was I saying? I saying the ladies on the roof were greeting Krishna, and Krishna was reciprocating with them. So the fact that did not mix with society, Prabhupada is that pointing out very in so many purports the position of women in Indian society. And that also brings us again to the position of the courtesans in that society that we discussed quite at length a few days ago, what we call in West sometimes prostitutes, sometimes public women, sometimes more proper word, courtesans. So there it was pointed out that the courtesans agreed to Krishna because they were so beautiful and they were allowed to be seen in the public because to some degree they were public women, although we would not say public woman, of course, but they were known to other, especially men, besides their husbands. Now the women were secluded, as you know, in India, even now there's, apartheid is being observed. Oh, and what I wanted to say earlier, one of the reasons for the flat roof in India is that you can sleep there in the summer because the house is way too hot. So in the certain part of the season, you sleep on the roof. I've slept on the roof thousands of times, and it's fresh. The wind blows. You don't need the air conditioning, and even if you have air conditioning, half the time the electricity doesn't work. So you have all these machines, but there's no power. So the roof is millions of people sleep on the whole family. Generally in beds that are covered with mosquito netting. So very, very comfortable. But so much work is involved. Here you would need a servant to set it all up, to arrange for it. But in India, servants, of course, are very common. You don't have to pay very much. Sometimes you just have to feed them, their local widows or whatever. Just a small amount. So it's a very different cultural ensemble that we see here. So Prabhupada is pointing out the position of the women is different according to the role they play. The courtesans may be viewed, maybe in view of everyone, because everybody can admire them. And they are the cultured ladies of the society. Here this is often forgotten. Here we think of a prostitute, like a person on Hastings Street, begging for, sleeping with 5 different men a day and getting a little money for alcohol or drugs or whatever. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the most cultured women of the society. And they were often educated in more than one language. They were familiar with the arts. They could perform dances. They could sing. They could entertain. Completely different idea that we have of that section of society. The courtesans, and similar to the idea I've mentioned before of the geishas in Japan. Geishas in Japan, you don't call them a dirty word starting with W-H-O-R-E, not like this, just the opposite. These are the most prominent women that can be admired. They may be even writers, or they may be artists, or they were the men would see them to have an intellectual conversation, because many times men would marry women who were not educated, women who didn't go to school. They were kept at home, so they might have had very minimal education. They didn't go to Gurukula. Like Krishna, after he left Vrindavan area, he was still a child, so to speak, and at age 10 or something, but he went with his brother to, what is the name of the Gurukula he went to? What is the name of the teacher? Sandapani Muni. He went to Sandapani Muni's ashram and studied there, and he learned, in addition to mathematics, etc., all the different arts. Very incredible when you read about it. It took him one day to learn one subject, and him and Balaram learned all the subjects in 1 year. Now, but the women were unfamiliar with these subjects per se, the married women. So often when a man wanted to have an intellectual conversation, he would meet street corner, but who lived in beautiful homes and who would welcome different personalities to have you could say, a very amicable and cultured relationship with. It's not just about sex, but there was a complete misunderstanding. If you're looking at Mangala Thakur, who had his association with a prostitute, and he was so attached to her that, we already referred to the story many times, that he swam across the river, hanging onto a walrus, and then he climbed up on the wall of her kutir by hanging on the tail of a snake. Very dramatic, very Bollywood, but what is the name again? Very beautiful name, very common. Yeah, Chintamani, exactly. And Chintamani said, look how mad you are about me, and I'm just a courtesan. Why aren't you mad like that about Krishna? And then Bilvamangala actually turned toward Krishna as his main lover, not Chintamani. It's a very beautiful story, and we can learn a lot from it. Just like in this world, we tend to be attached to material things. So it's very difficult for us to be attached to things that are non-material, that we cannot visualize. It might be, we might be enthused by that. We might be jealous of somebody who has this or that, and we also strive for that. These are different ideas and different emotions that we follow. But these are never objects that are completely abstract. They're always concrete. Even getting a PhD degree or getting a CEO position in a big company or whatever. I was just reading that it says Elon Musk, whoever that is the richest CEO in the world, and he's becoming the first trillionaire in history. First trillionaire. You see? So we also have different levels of society that are not so charming in many ways, but the levels of society during Krishna's times are very, very charming, and they were somewhat overlapping, just like, say Brahman is intellectual and priest, and Kshatriya is a warrior and a protector and a politician. But if you think this in black and white terms, you miss the point. There's much overlap, because the Kshatriyas were also highly educated. They were highly educated depending on their status, their position, and their desire. Otherwise, how would they rule? They're not uneducated personalities. So there's always a soft, I want to point this out, a soft line between the castes. Very important. So the point I'm making is that whether one is a Brahmana or a Kshatriya or a Vaishya or even a Shudra or even an untouchable in the end, it says here that Krishna greeted everyone with affection. It says he smiled on everyone. He entered the city, and you see, he greeted everyone. Extra dramatists, artists, dancers, singers, historians, genealogists, and learned speakers all gave their respective contributions, being inspired by the superhuman pastime of the Lord, as they proceeded on and on and on. So it's very important to understand the variety of that society. Not just think, oh yeah, Chatur ashram, 4 ashrams, and then you're thinking of them, they're all separate. They're not, they're overlapping. Many times one may have a Brahmin for a father and maybe a Kshatriya for a mother, or vice versa, even lower class. There's stories of well-known persons who would have some sexual relationship with a lower class person and produce the kind of sage-like personalities. So it's very important to not look at it in a black and white way, but as just a simple blueprint that has to be interpreted with many footnotes. Otherwise, especially as us people from the West who are not educated in Indian culture, and you're hearing a few things in many times. Our knowledge is so limited. I myself, when I started living in India, more or less full time, many years ago, I don't know, 35, 40 years ago, and I lived in an Indian village, I was shocked to see what Indian society is like, especially on the village level and all the habits they have, and some of these are very good, some are not very good. So I was surprised because it's not what I learned in, let's say, in ISKCON. It's not what I learned in the temples in the West. It's the variety of castes in Indian society. There's really thousands of castes and subcastes. Just as a side note, I was just reading somewhere, it says the different dialects in one particular place, I think it was in Africa, so many dialects, hundreds and hundreds of dialects. And I was reporting to that person, I said, even in my country, in the Netherlands, each village has slight different dialects of each other village, even though they're 15, 20 kilometers away. The way I might say castle or castile, somebody else might speak it slightly differently, slightly different pronunciation, slightly different word even. So there's so much variety. So we can see here that when the Srimad Bhagavatam is outlining the variety, especially as I read it one more time, expert dramatists, artists, dancers, singers, historians, genealogists, and learned speakers all gave their respective contributions. Well, if you started analyzing these terms, we would be amazed. What does it mean? A dramatist. People who write drama are famous writers, who produce drama. So all of these well-known personalities were there to greet Krishna, and it gives us an idea of the variegatedness of the society, you can say 5,000 years ago. So it's very attractive, and the remnants, of course, are still there. India still has, very much caste conscious, or you can say subcaste conscious, but it is fading, and it is fading also amongst you can say the Indian population, especially when you come to the West. When you come to the West, you have to adopt to our particular modalities, and you have to fit in, and you can't act like a strange Indian, whatever caste you are, and think you're going to impose that here. You behave that is somewhat in harmony with also with Western culture. But I'm just thinking right now, some new people are walking into the audience, and people are sitting on the floor on a mat. Very beautiful. There's many ideas from India that we kept in place. In Europe, nobody sits on the floor. Everybody sits in a chair. Just like when you look at the church I grew up in, the Christian Reformed Church, there's what you call a pew. A pew is a long seat. There might be 2 or 3 rows of pews in one church, depending on the size, and a pew might hold maybe 10 people can sit in one pew. Very soft pillow, beautiful to sit, and even when you offer your prayers, you don't fall on the floor. There's no such thing as falling on the floor in European tradition when you're going to a temple or church. So it's very different. Whereas in India, the floor is considered very sacred. You sit on the floor, you offer obeisances. You come into the temple here, you see people spread out, head first, nose on the floor. It's very, very interesting. So some of this culture we are keeping, and I'm sure it will be kept in the future also, because it's variety is the spice of life. Variety is the spice of life. So but there are other, you can say other customs that, especially out in the world, we're talking here about the temple, out in the world, that we conform to Western mentality. So it's very beautiful. Just like I have very small, maybe many of you are not even aware of it, but in the West, a man will open the door for a and then you go down the path. The man will let the woman walk first. This is Western culture, but often even when somebody walks me home, guess where I walk? In front of the man or behind the man? What do you think, Ravi? Behind. Because my hero is to make sure there's no lions or tigers or elephants on the way or snakes, you see. So it's different, it's reverse. So I always joke, I say, no, there's probably, what do you call snake in Hindi? What is it? Yeah, it's outside. There might be signs on the way. And then they're laughing, and then they walk ahead, and they feel comfortable. But in the West, the man does not walk ahead, the woman walks ahead. So you can see, and I'm just mentioning a very small item, I joke and I play with it, but it's so beautiful how according to time, place, and circumstance, what do you call time, place, and circumstance in Sanskrit? God, pardon me? Desh, depending on the desh, the country, depending on the place, and depending on the time. Kalapatra desh. So Kalapatra desh has to be observed, In India, we behave in a certain way. In the West, we behave a certain way. When you're downtown Vancouver, you're catching the bus, you behave in a certain way. So this is also then what we are seeing in the Srimad Bhagavatam, that Krishna, the Bhagavatam outlines all these different category of people who have different relationships with Krishna. And as I said before, especially for our newcomers who just came in the verse that we're reading, it says, I'll read the verse again to you because you're here. It says, the Lord personally entered the city, accompanied by elderly relatives and invalid Brahmins with their wives, all offering benedictions and singing the glories of the Lord. Others praised the glories of the Lord. So he came with the elderly relatives, and this is apropos. And invalid Brahmins with their wives. Very interesting. So elderly relatives means he's not with all the young people singing and dancing and, picking up dust. No. This is elderly relatives and moving in a slow manner and in a very respectful, beautiful manner. So, very interesting. This chapter is one of my favorites because it gives an outline of the social situation at that time of Krishna's appearance on the earth 5,000 years ago. So it's somewhat different from ours, but it's also still in vogue at this time. At the same time, according to time, place, and circumstances, we act in a certain way, and we're not per se, you can say, adhering to rules and regulations, because sometimes it doesn't apply. Rules can be completely eliminated. What did Prabhupada say? No. Sometimes when there was nothing to eat in the East, people are preaching in Russia or whatever, you actually give them permission to eat whatever is there. You eat whatever food. It's not, you don't go to Russia or a place like that and there's nothing to eat for pure vegetarians per se. Prabhupada would break rules and regulations in order to get this higher knowledge. It's very interesting. Just like yesterday, I think it was yesterday, when a class was given, and somebody talked about prostitute, that they met somewhere in the West, and it's what they call prostitute, society girl, and it says that she had books, she was interested in more books, she read all the books, she had the books at her home, and she was following the rules and regulations, but apparently she was a society girl, or prostitute, whatever you want to call them. So the talk didn't go too far, but somebody later asked me, can a person who is completely following Prabhupada's teachings, but who does not 100% follow the four regulations, can they be initiated into ISKCON? It says they're lovers of Krishna. Krishna loves them, they love Krishna, and it's reciprocal. But can they be initiated? So can they be initiated? If you're in the meat business, or in the prostitution business, or in the drug business, or in the gambling business, can you be initiated into ISKCON? What is the answer? I hope you know the answer. It's no, absolutely not. So I want you to understand that there is a difference between how we generically accept those who may not follow rules and regulations per se, but who love Krishna and Krishna reciprocates to them, but they may not be acceptable as a initiated Hare Krishna devotee. So is it interesting? It's interesting. So you can see, we're not speaking against initiation, that would be completely inappropriate, but we can also understand that initiation is not the essence of your spiritual life. Sometimes it's referred to as putting a banana in the fire. So you put a banana in the fire, and different mantras are spoken, and it's sweet. So that is a ceremony, and it's a ritual. And you have to understand the difference between ritual and actual, you can say, emotional moods, spiritual understanding, etc. The ritual is external, just like we do the puja every day. This puja can be done by anybody who knows the rules and regs, who knows how to count 1 time, 3 times, 7 times, 4 times, who can do all of these things. It can be done by an atheist. You can train an atheist to stand here and act like a perfect pujari on the temple. Who can deny it? You see, and then you might have a very advanced Krishna Bhakta who doesn't have a clue. He says, "What do you mean? I don't know how to do this." And put the fan down. They don't know how to do it because one might do different events in their mind. Just like, who was it who was cooking for Krishna? In the mind, doing everything in the mind. And he was cooking sweet rice for Krishna, and finally thought, I wonder if it's too hot to offer, because you don't want to serve Krishna, he burns his tongue. So they said, let me just try it. And he dipped his finger in the dream. He dipped his finger in the rice, and immediately he woke up out of the dream, and his finger was burning. So isn't it so? Why this story has happened? Why this story is so important is because there is a bridge between our mental events or our meditation that we're creating in our mind and actual rituals. There is one is subtle and one is gross. And we cannot say the subtle is better or the gross is better. The path in between is there. He is meditating and he burns his finger in meditation. So this is not imagining. He was actually burned. So between the physical, the psychological, and the spiritual, there's a very different platform, very interesting platforms that are different in terms of description, but they have the overlapping self. And what overlaps all those states? What is it what overlaps all the states? Your own consciousness. Huh? Like in your dream, it's not that you're not you, but in your dream, you might do all kinds of things that you usually wouldn't do. You can fly in your dream. You can travel at the speed of light in a dream. You can go here and there. You can do whatever you want in a dream. Why can't you do it in a dream? Because your body, which is made of the gross element, is absent. The body of the stula sarir is absent, so you can do what you want in the shukshma sarir, in your mind. In your mind, you can do so many things. So here, those who came to see Krishna were invalid, and I'm not saying, I don't know if they had wheelchairs those days, but they were probably carried in, what do you call it? What do you call it? What thing are you carried on in India? A pelican, yeah, pelican. So they're carried on palanquins, and the wife is telling where to go, what to do, And in India, of course, palanquins are very common. I remember taking palanquin many times when I would see, I think I would go to Radharani's temple, and it's up a high hill, and the palanquin bearers are standing at the bottom. They're happy to get 100 rupees from you. So you sit in the palanquin and you carry it up, and it's very beautiful. The slight shaking and moving, and you can look around and you're not worried about falling. So beautiful, this palanquin. I don't think they ever had it in the West, but it's a very beautiful way. And palanquins, of course, can be used for royalty. It can be very, very luxurious, or it can be used for invalids. Huh? Just like a wheelchair. We don't think, I mean, we don't want to see a king in a wheelchair, but when you're seeing somebody being driven, driven around, a person in a expensive